My name is Naomi, and I am 63 years old. I remember standing outside that lawyer's office, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe, when my own two sons blocked my path. Derek looked at me coldly and said, "This meeting is only for the heirs named in the will." Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, smiled that fake smile of hers. I said nothing. I simply reached into my purse and handed their lawyer a folder, in complete silence. When he opened it, everything changed. Before I tell you what was in that folder, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from today? Please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is about to take a turn that even I did not see coming. Stay with me. To understand how I ended up standing outside that lawyer's office being told I was not welcome, I need to take you back to where it all began. Back to a time when life was simpler, when love was pure, and when I still believed that family would always protect each other. I met Harold at a small church in Sacramento, California 40 years ago. I was 23 years old back then, working as a secretary at a local insurance company. I made just enough to pay my rent and buy groceries with barely anything left over. But I was happy. I had dreams, and I believed that good things came to those who worked hard and stayed faithful. Harold was 27 when we first crossed paths. He had just opened a small building supply store on the outskirts of town. It was nothing fancy, just a modest space filled with lumber nails and whatever construction materials he could afford to stock. But when he talked about that little store, his eyes lit up like he was describing a palace. He had vision, and more importantly, he had determination. Our courtship was simple and sweet. We would meet after church on Sundays, walk through the park, and talk for hours about our hopes and dreams. Harold would tell me about his plans to expand the business to build something that would last. I would listen and believe every word he said. There was something about him that made me feel safe, like no matter what challenges lay ahead, we could face them together. We got married in that same little church where we first met. It was a small ceremony, just our families and a handful of close friends. I wore my sister's wedding dress because I could not afford one of my own. Harold wore a suit he had borrowed from his brother. We did not have much, but standing at that altar looking into each other's eyes, we felt like the richest people in the world. Harold made me a promise that day. He said, "I am going to give you the best life I can, Naomi. It might take time, but I will never stop working to make you happy." And he meant every word. The first 10 years of our marriage were the hardest of my life. Harold's store struggled constantly. There were months when we did not know if we could keep the doors open. Twice we came within days of losing everything. The bank threatened to foreclose suppliers, refused to extend credit, and customers were scarce. During those years, I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. By day, I continued my work as a secretary. By night, I waited tables at a diner across town. I would come home exhausted, my feet aching, my body crying out for rest. But there was no time for rest. We had bills to pay and a dream to keep alive. I remember one particularly difficult winter when we could barely afford to heat our tiny apartment. Harold and I would sit at the kitchen table eating bread and beans for dinner because that was all we could afford. We would look at each other, and instead of complaining, we would laugh. We would remind each other that this was temporary, that better days were coming. I gave up my own career ambitions during those years. I had once dreamed of going back to school, maybe becoming a teacher or a nurse, but every extra dollar I earned went straight into the business. Every sacrifice I made was for our shared future, and I never resented it, not for a single moment. That was what marriage meant to me, 2 people building something together brick by brick. Harold worked from before sunrise until long after sunset. He would come home with sawdust in his hair and calluses on his hands, too tired to eat but never too tired to tell me he loved me. We were partners in every sense of the word. I kept the books called Customers, and sometimes even helped load trucks when we were short-handed. We built that business together with our own sweat and tears. Our first son, Derek, was born when I was 26 years old. 2 years later, Brandon came along. Those boys has changed everything. Suddenly, we were not just working for ourselves anymore. We were building a future for our children. Money was still tight, so I could not afford childcare. I would bring Derek and Brandon to the store with me, setting up a little play area in the back corner surrounded by stacks of lumber. They grew up among the sounds of saws and hammers, watching their father work tirelessly to provide for our family. I was the one who raised those boys in every practical sense. Harold loved them dearly, but he was always working. I was the one who helped with homework, who drove them to school, who sat by their beds when they were sick. I taught them to read, to tie their shoes, to say please and thank you. I poured my heart and soul into making sure they had every opportunity I never had. Harold would tell me constantly how grateful he was. He knew the sacrifices I was making. He would say, "Naomi, I could not do any of this without you. You are the foundation of this family." And I believed him. I believed that he saw my worth, that he valued everything I contributed. After 20 years of struggle, our fortunes finally began to change. Harold's little store had grown into a chain of 5 successful locations across Northern California. Our modest savings had transformed into substantial wealth. We moved from our cramped apartment into a beautiful home in the suburbs with a garden and a 2-car garage, and more space than I ever dreamed of having. Derek and Brandon graduated from good colleges. We paid for everything, wanting to give them the head start in life that neither Harold nor I had enjoyed. I thought we were doing the right thing. I thought we were setting them up for success and happiness. I stopped working outside the home and focused on taking care of our family. I cooked, cleaned, hosted dinner parties for Harold's business associates, and made sure our home was always warm and welcoming. Harold often said to me, "We built this together, Naomi, every single brick." And I treasured those words. I held on to them like precious gems. I truly believed we would grow old together, enjoying the fruits of our labor. We talked about traveling, seeing the world, making up for all those years when we could not afford a proper vacation. Paris, Rome, Tokyo. All those places we had only seen in magazines. Harold promised we would visit them all once things slowed down a bit. But things never really slowed down. There was always one more deal, one more expansion, one more reason to delay our dreams. And I waited patiently because I trusted him, because I trusted that everything he was doing for us. I should have seen the signs earlier. Looking back now with the clarity that only hindsight can provide, the warning signals were everywhere. I just chose not to see them, or maybe I did not want to believe what they meant. Derek, my firstborn, was 37 years old when things started to change. He had been working in his father's company for over a decade, climbing the ranks from warehouse worker to regional manager. I was proud of him, proud that he wanted to be part of the family business. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. His wife Tiffany came from money, old money, the kind that traces back generations. Her family owned properties across 3 states, and she had grown up with servants and summer homes and everything that Harold and I had never experienced. When Derek first brought her home, I wanted to like her. I really did. She was beautiful and polished with perfect posture and an expensive smile. But there was something in the way Tiffany looked at me that made me uncomfortable. It was subtle, the kind of thing you might miss if you were not paying attention. A slight raise of her eyebrow when she saw our home, a barely concealed smirk when I served dinner, comments that sounded like compliments but felt like criticisms. She would say things like, "Mom, maybe you should try something more modern next time when I cook my grandmother's recipes." Or how quaint when she looked at our family photos. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being too sensitive. But the feeling never went away. What hurt more was that Derek never defended me. He would sit there silently while Tiffany made her little remarks, looking down at his plate like he had not heard anything. When I tried to talk to him about it privately, he would say I was imagining things, that Tiffany loved me, that I needed to give her a chance. Tiffany started making suggestions about the business, even though she had never worked a day in her life. She would corner Harold at family dinners, talking about expansion strategies and market shares and other things she had clearly read about in some magazine. And increasingly, she would hint that Derek should be given more control. "Dad, you should really let Derek take over more responsibilities," she would say. "You and Mom are not getting any younger. You deserve to relax." I noticed how her eyes would light up when she talked about the company's value, about potential sales, about what everything might be worth. And I noticed how Derek seemed to be listening to her more than he listened to his own parents. Brandon, my younger son, had taken a different path. At 35, he was a successful lawyer, sharp and ambitious. He had met his wife Meredith in law school, and they had built a practice together. She was smart, I will give her that. Maybe too smart for her own good. Where Tiffany was obvious in her tactics, Meredith was subtle. She never made snide comments about my cooking or my home. Instead, she asked questions. Endless questions about Harold's finances, his investments, his plans for the future. "Dad, have you thought about estate planning?" she would ask casually over Thanksgiving dinner. It is really important to be prepared, especially as we get older. You never know what might happen. At first, I thought she was just being practical, looking out for the family. But the questions kept coming more pointed each time. She wanted to know about life insurance policies, about property deeds, about the exact value of each store. And she was always taking notes, always calculating something behind those cold eyes. I watched my sons change before my eyes. The boys I had raised, the children I had sacrificed everything for, were becoming strangers. They spent more time with their wives than with us. When they visited, which became less and less frequent, they talked more about money than about memories. The warmth that once filled our family dinners had been replaced by something else, something that made me uneasy. Then Harold got sick. 5 years before he passed, the doctors diagnosed him with lung cancer. It was like a bomb going off in the middle of our lives. Harold, my strong, hard-working husband, suddenly looked fragile. The man who had worked 16-hour days without complaint was now too weak to climb the stairs. I devoted myself completely to his care. I learned about his medications, his treatments, his dietary needs. I drove him to chemotherapy appointments and held his hand when the nausea overwhelmed him. I stayed up nights watching him sleep, afraid that if I closed my eyes I might lose him. During those difficult years, I expected our sons to rally around us. I expected them to put aside their busy lives and be present for their dying father. But they rarely came. And when they did visit, the conversations were not about love or family or making the most of whatever time Harold had left. They talked about the business, about stocks and shares and ownership percentages, about what would happen after. They talked around Harold like he was already gone, making plans for assets he was still alive to manage. Tiffany was the worst. I overheard her say to Derek once, "We need to make sure your dad updates his will while he is still lucid. You know how these things can get complicated if you wait too long." I wanted to slap her. I wanted to grab her by her perfectly styled hair and throw her out of my house. But I held my tongue because Harold was sick, and I did not want to cause more stress. I swallowed my anger and focused on what mattered most, keeping my husband comfortable. But it was not just Tiffany. Meredith and Brandon were having private conversations with Harold as well, meetings in his study with the door closed. Whenever I walked in, they would stop talking mid-sentence, looking at me with expressions I could not read. I asked Harold about it. I said, "What are you all discussing in there? Why do I feel like I am being left out of something important?" He took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Do not worry, Naomi," he said. "I know what I'm doing. Trust me. Everything will be fine." And I trusted him. I trusted him because I had trusted him for 40 years. I trusted him because he had never given me a reason not to. I trusted him because that was what love meant to me. But deep down in a place I did not want to acknowledge, something felt wrong. I could not shake the feeling that my sons and their wives were planning something, and that whatever it was, it did not include me. Harold's last months were both precious and painful. His body was failing, but his spirit remained strong. We spent hours together, just the two of us, talking about the life we had shared. He would hold my hand and reminisce about our early days, about that little church where we first met, about the struggles that had made us stronger. "I am so grateful for you," he would whisper. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." I cherished those moments, storing them in my heart like treasures. I knew our time was running short, and I wanted to memorize every word, every touch, every smile. One evening, about 2 weeks before he passed, Harold called me to his bedside. His voice was weaker than usual, and there was an urgency in his eyes that I had not seen before. "Naomi," he said, "I need to give you something." He reached under his pillow and pulled out a small key. It was old-fashioned, the kind that might open a chest or a safe. He pressed it into my palm and wrapped my fingers around it. "Keep this safe," he said. "When the time comes, you will know what to do." I did not understand. "What does it open?" I asked. "What am I supposed to do with it?" He just smiled, that tired, loving smile that I knew so well. "Trust me," he said. "When you need it, you will understand." I put the key in my purse, confused but obedient. Harold had always taken care of things. He had always known what was best. If he said I would understand when the time came, then I believed him. 2 days later, Harold passed away peacefully in his sleep. I was right there beside him, holding his hand just as I had been for the past 5 years. When I woke up that morning and realized he was gone, a part of me died with him. The man I had loved for 4 decades, the father of my children, my partner in everything, was gone. I expected the grief to bring our family together. I expected Derek and Brandon to comfort me, to help me through the darkest time of my life. Instead, they took control. Within hours of Harold's death, my sons arrived at the house, not to grieve with me, but to make arrangements. They hired the most expensive funeral home in the city, ordering elaborate flower arrangements and printed programs without consulting me about any of it. Mom, you are too emotional right now, Derek said when I tried to voice my opinion. Let us handle everything. You just rest. But I did not want to rest. I wanted to be involved in saying goodbye to my husband. I wanted to choose the flowers he would have liked, the music that meant something to us, the words that would be spoken over his casket. They did not listen. Tiffany took charge of the guest list, inviting business associates Harold barely knew, while forgetting old friends who had been with us for decades. Meredith handled the legal notifications, her lawyer brain already calculating next steps that had nothing to do with mourning. When I said I wanted to read the eulogy to share our love story with everyone who had gathered to remember Harold, they shut me down immediately. It would be too hard for you, Tiffany said, placing a condescending hand on my shoulder. We do not want you breaking down in front of everyone. Derek will speak. He will represent the family. Derek did speak at the funeral. He stood at the podium in his expensive suit and talked about Harold, the businessman Harold, the entrepreneur Harold, the builder of an empire. He spoke about assets and achievements and legacy in terms of dollars and cents. Not once did he mention the love Harold and I shared. Not once did he acknowledge the 40 years we spent building everything together. Not once did he thank me for the sacrifices I made so that Harold could succeed. I sat in the front row, invisible in my own husband's funeral. When it came time for the final viewing, I wanted to stand beside Harold's casket to say my private goodbye, to hold his hand one last time. But Tiffany and Meredith positioned themselves on either side, forming a barrier I could not cross. Mom, you should sit down, Meredith said. You look exhausted. I am fine, I insisted. I just want a moment with my husband. They did not move. They stood there like sentries, their practiced expressions of sympathy barely masking something else, something that looked almost triumphant. People came to pay their respects, and they greeted Derek and Brandon first, as if my sons were the bereaved, and I was just an afterthought. I watched hands being shaken, condolences being offered, and none of it was directed at me. When the funeral director announced it was time to close the casket, I pushed forward, desperate for one final moment, but Derek stepped in front of me. Mom, it is time, he said. We need to let go. The lid closed before I could even whisper goodbye. My last image of Harold was his peaceful face, and then it was gone, sealed away, taken from me by the children I had raised and loved. After the funeral, after the guests had left and the flowers had wilted, I returned to an empty house. The bed I had shared with Harold for 40 years felt enormous and cold. I could still smell his cologne on his pillow, but he was not there to hold me. Derek and Brandon came by the next day, but not to check on me. They came to talk about what was next. Mom, we need to discuss the will reading, Brandon said, his lawyer voice detached and clinical. It is scheduled for next week. Just a formality, really. Nothing to worry about. Why the rush, I asked. Your father just died. Can we not have some time to grieve? They exchanged a glance that I did not understand. It is important to settle these things quickly, Derek said. For everyone's peace of mind. They left without asking if I needed anything, without offering to stay for dinner, without a single embrace or word of genuine comfort. That night I sat alone in the darkness, clutching Harold's pillow to my chest, and I wondered not for the first time what had happened to my boys. Where were the children I had raised? Where were the sons who used to run to me with their problems, who used to tell me they loved me every day? They were gone, replaced by strangers who looked at me like an obstacle, not a mother. The day of the will reading arrived cold and gray. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple black dress that Harold had always liked. I wanted to look composed, dignified. I wanted to honor his memory, even in this sterile legal proceeding. I assumed this would be a formality. Harold and I had talked about our finances over the years, though, admittedly, he handled most of the details. I knew the business was valuable, knew we had investments and properties. I assumed naturally that as his wife of 40 years, I would be taken care of. That was what husbands did, was it not? They protected their wives. I drove to the lawyer's office alone. Nobody had offered to pick me up. Nobody had asked if I wanted company. When I arrived, I saw Derek's expensive sedan and Brandon's German import already parked in the lot. Tiffany's white luxury SUV was there too, and Meredith's sleek sports car. They were all here. The whole family gathered to divide the spoils. I walked toward the building entrance, my heart beating faster with each step. Something felt wrong. I could not explain it, but there was a heaviness in the air, a sense of impending disaster that I could not shake. The reception area was quiet. A young woman behind the desk smiled politely and pointed me toward the conference room at the end of the hall. I walked slowly, my heels clicking against the marble floor, echoing in the silence. When I reached the conference room door, Derek stepped out to block my path. "Mom?" he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here?" I blinked, confused. "I am here for the will reading," I said. Harold was my husband. Brandon appeared behind his brother, his lawyer face firmly in place. "Mom," he said slowly, "this meeting is only for the heirs named in the will." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" I stammered. "I am his wife. Of course I am named in the will." Tiffany emerged from the conference room, that familiar fake smile plastered across her face. "We are sorry, Mom," she said, not sounding sorry at all. But Dad made his wishes very clear. Meredith joined her arms, crossed over her chest. "It is all legal," she added. "You are not named in the will. There is nothing here for you." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. For a moment I thought I might collapse. 40 years. 40 years of marriage, of sacrifice, of building a life together. And they were telling me I had been left with nothing. "That is impossible," I heard myself say. "Harold would never do that to me." Derek's expression did not change. Dad knew what he was doing. He said coldly, "Please go home, Mom. This does not concern you." I stood there frozen, unable to process what was happening. My own sons, the children I had carried in my body, nursed at my breast, raised with every ounce of love I possessed, were dismissing me like an unwanted guest. Tiffany actually smiled. A real smile this time, dripping with satisfaction. "You should have seen this coming." "Mom," she said quietly, "did you really think you would get everything after all these years of doing nothing?" "Nothing." She said I had done nothing. The rage that rose inside me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. 40 years of working 2 jobs, 40 years of cooking and cleaning and sacrificing my own dreams, 40 years of being the foundation that held everything together. And this woman, this interloper who had married my son for his potential inheritance, dared to say I had done nothing. But I did not explode. I did not scream or cry or throw myself at their feet begging for mercy. Something inside me went very calm, very still, and in that moment of clarity I remembered. The key. Harold's key. I had not used it yet. After Harold died, I had been so consumed with grief and funeral arrangements that I had forgotten about it. But now, standing in that hallway, being rejected by my own family, I remembered his words. "When the time comes, you will know what to do." This was the time. The night before, almost without thinking, I had found the key in my purse. It had led me to a small safe hidden in the back of Harold's home office closet, behind old boxes I had never thought to move. Inside, I found a folder thick with documents, and a letter that changed everything. Now, facing my sons and their venomous wives, I felt the weight of that folder in my purse. They did not know about it. They had no idea what Harold had truly planned. "I am not leaving," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands, and I reached into my purse. The look on their faces when I pulled out that folder was something I will never forget. Confusion first, then concern. Then, as I walked past them into the conference room, something very close to fear. The lawyer, a middle-aged man named Robert Patterson, looked up from his papers as I entered. He seemed surprised to see me. "Mrs. Harrison," he said carefully, "I was told you would not be joining us." "I was told the same thing," I replied, placing the folder on the table in front of him. "But before you proceed, I believe you need to see this." He looked at Derek and Brandon, then at me, then at the folder. There was a moment of hesitation before he reached for it. I stood perfectly still, watching, waiting. Patterson opened the folder slowly. His eyes moved across the first page, then the second. I saw the color drain from his face. His mouth opened slightly closed, then opened again. "What is that?" Tiffany demanded. "What did she give you?" Patterson did not answer immediately. He continued reading, flipping through page after page. When he finally looked up, his expression had completely changed. "I need to make a phone call," he said quietly. "This changes everything." What are you talking about? Derek snapped. That will was properly executed. Whatever she has given you is irrelevant. Patterson shook his head slowly. Mr. Harrison, this document is dated 3 months before your father's death. It was executed by a different attorney, notarized and witnessed by 2 independent parties. He paused. This is your father's final will and testament. It supersedes the one we were about to read. The room went silent. Completely, utterly silent. Brandon, the lawyer of the family, reached for the folder. Let me see that, he said, his professional composure cracking. Patterson handed it over. I watched Brandon's face as he watched the confidence crumble into disbelief. His hands were shaking by the time he reached the end. This cannot be right, he whispered. But it was right. Every word of it. Harold had known. He had known what our sons were planning, what their wives were scheming. And he had protected me. The will that Derek and Brandon had convinced their father to sign, the one that left everything to them, was worthless. Harold had secretly met with his own attorney, an old friend from the early days of his business, and created a new will, a real will, one that reflected his true wishes. In this document, Harold left 70% of his entire estate to me. The house was mine completely and outright. The investments, the properties, the savings, all of it was mine to control as I saw fit. Derek and Brandon were each given 15%, a fraction of what they had expected, what they had planned, what they had manipulated their dying father to give them. But that was not all. Harold had included a special clause. If any heir contested the will, their share would be reduced to 5%. He had anticipated their reaction and built in a defense against it. Patterson pulled another document from the folder. There is also this, he said, a letter from Mr. Harrison to be read aloud at this proceeding. I already knew what the letter said. I had read it the night before alone in our bedroom, tears streaming down my face, but hearing it spoken aloud in front of the sons who had betrayed me gave it a different weight. Patterson cleared his throat and began to read. To my sons, Derek and Brandon, the letter began. I have watched you change over the years. You have let greed and your wives' influence take over your hearts. You forgot who raised you, who sacrificed everything for this family. Your mother gave up her career, her dreams, her youth, so I could build this company. Every dollar we have, she earned it alongside me. Derek's face was bright red. Brandon stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. If you are hearing this letter, Harold's words continued, it means you have tried to push your mother aside. It means you have forgotten everything she did for you. It means you have chosen money over the woman who gave you life. Shame on you. Patterson paused, letting the words sink in. The silence in that room was deafening. Your mother will have full control of the estate. She can choose to share it with you or not. That will be her decision, not yours. You have no right to demand anything from her after what you have done. The letter went on to detail specific bequests, instructions for the business, personal messages that I will keep private. But the core message was clear. Harold had seen through our son's schemes. He had known they would try to take everything, and from beyond the grave he had stopped them. When Patterson finished reading, nobody spoke. Derek and Brandon sat frozen. Tiffany and Meredith had lost their composure entirely, their faces masks of shock and fury. I looked at each of them in turn. These were not strangers. These were my children, the people I had loved more than my own life. And yet they had been willing to throw me away like garbage, to leave me with nothing after decades of devotion. The pain was almost unbearable, but so was the relief. The aftermath of that will reading was exactly as Harold had predicted. Derek was the first to react, slamming his hand on the conference table so hard that the paper scattered. "This is fake," he shouted. "Dad would never do this. She must have forged it. She manipulated him when he was dying." His accusation stung, but Patterson was ready for it. "The documents have been authenticated," he said calmly. "I spoke with Mr. Harrison's personal attorney this morning. Everything is in order. This will was executed with full legal formality while your father was still of sound mind. The witnesses are prepared to testify to that effect if necessary." Brandon, who understood the legal implications better than his brother, remained silent. His lawyer training told him what his emotions refused to accept. The will was ironclad. There was no way around it, but Tiffany was not ready to surrender. "We will contest this," she hissed at me. "We will take you to court. We will prove that you coerced Harold into signing this." Patterson shook his head. Mrs. Harrison, he said, addressing her formally, I would strongly advise against that course of action. As you have heard, any contest to this will automatically reduces the challenger's share from 15% to 5%. That provision has been upheld in similar cases. You would be throwing away money on legal fees for a battle you cannot win. Meredith turned to her husband, fury blazing in her eyes. You said you had this handled, she snapped at Brandon. You said everything was in place. You assured me there would be no problems. Her words cut through the tension like a knife. In her anger, she had revealed more than she intended. She had confirmed what I already suspected, that this had all been planned. That my sons and their wives had conspired together to take everything, leaving me with nothing. Brandon could not meet her gaze. He sat there deflated, all his legal brilliance useless against his father's foresight. I stood up. For the first time since entering that room, I spoke. How could I do this to you? Derek asked me earlier today, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Let me tell you what you did to me. I looked at each of them in turn, making sure they heard every word. You did not let me say goodbye to my husband at his own funeral. You pushed me aside like I was nobody. You tried to take everything your father and I built together. For 40 years, I gave everything to this family. I worked 2 jobs so your father could keep his business. I raised you while he was away. I sacrificed my own career so you could have a better life. My voice broke slightly, but I pushed on. And this is how you repay me. By telling me I am not an heir, by treating me like an outsider in my own family. I pointed at Derek and Brandon, at Tiffany and Meredith. Your father saw who you had become. He watched you change. He heard your conversations, your plans, your schemes, and he protected me from you, his own sons, because he knew that I deserved better than to be thrown away like garbage by the children I raised. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I did not care. They needed to hear this. You let these women I gestured at, Tiffany and Meredith, poison your minds. You let greed replace love. You forgot everything your father and I taught you about family, about loyalty, about gratitude. I gathered my purse and walked toward the door. And the saddest part, I said, turning back one last time, is that Harold wanted to leave you more. He loved you despite everything. But you proved that you did not deserve it. You proved that his love meant nothing compared to his money. I walked out without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Tiffany's angry voice and Meredith's sharp accusations. I could hear my sons calling after me, their words lost in the chaos they had created. But I kept walking. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. I stood on the steps of that office building and breathed deeply. The air smelled like rain and fresh beginnings. For the first time since Harold died, I did not feel alone. He was with me. His love, his protection, his foresight. He had reached out from beyond the grave to shield me from the very children we had raised together. Thank you, Harold, I whispered into the wind. Thank you for knowing. Thank you for saving me. The months that followed were not easy. There were lawyers and paperwork and endless details to sort through. Derek and Brandon, despite Patterson's warnings, did attempt to contest the will. They lost. Their share dropped from 15% to 5% each, just as Harold had specified. Tiffany filed for divorce from Derek 3 months after the will reading. Once it became clear that the vast fortune she had married into had been reduced to a fraction of what she expected, her love evaporated overnight. She took half of Derek's remaining share in the divorce settlement and moved to Florida with a man she had apparently been seeing for years. Derek called me after she left. He was crying something I had not heard since he was a boy with a skinned knee. Mom, he sobbed, I am so sorry. I did not see it. I did not see what she was doing to me, to us. I listened, my heart aching despite everything. He was still my son. Nothing could change that. Sorry is just a word, Derek, I said quietly. Show me you have changed. Meredith and Brandon stayed together, but their marriage was strained. Meredith blamed Brandon for the failure of their plan for not securing the inheritance she had counted on. I heard from mutual friends that they barely spoke anymore, that their partnership had become a prison of resentment and recrimination. Brandon also reached out eventually, though it took him longer. His pride was harder to swallow than Derek's. When he finally called, his voice was small and humble. I do not expect you to forgive me, he said. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What we did was wrong. What I did was unforgivable. I did not argue with him. He was right. As for me, I made changes. Big changes. I sold the chain of stores that Harold had built, all except one, the original location where everything had started, that little shop with its worn wooden floors and memories in every corner. I kept that, transforming it into a community workshop where young entrepreneurs could learn business skills. Harold would have loved that. With the money from the sales, I did something I had dreamed about for 40 years. I traveled. Paris in springtime with its cafes and cobblestone streets, Rome in summer wandering through ancient ruins and eating gelato by fountains, Tokyo in autumn amazed by the blend of tradition and technology. I visited all the places Harold and I had talked about, carrying his photograph with me, sharing every sunset and every landmark with his memory. I made new friends along the way, other women my age, some widowed like me, some simply looking for adventure. We laughed together, explored together, supported each other through the difficult moments when grief would ambush us unexpectedly. I also gave back. Using a portion of the estate, I established a scholarship fund in Harold's name for women pursuing education while raising families. Women who were doing what I had done, sacrificing their own dreams to build something for the people they loved. I wanted them to know that their work mattered, that someone saw them, that there was hope for their own futures. The first recipient of the scholarship was a 32-year-old mother of 3 who was working nights while finishing her nursing degree. When I handed her the check, she cried and hugged me. "You have no idea what this means," she said. But I did know. I knew exactly what it meant. Time has a way of healing wounds, though scars remain. Derek slowly came back into my life, not as the entitled, greedy man he had become, but as something closer to the boy I remembered raising. Without Tiffany's influence, he began to rediscover himself. He took a job at a small construction company, working his way up from the bottom just as his father had done. He called me every Sunday, and sometimes we had lunch together. I forgave him. Not all at once, but gradually, as he proved through actions rather than words that he had changed. Forgiveness, I learned, was not about excusing what had been done. It was about releasing myself from the burden of carrying that anger forever. Brandon remained more distant. Meredith's presence in his life was like a wall between us, a constant reminder of what they had tried to do. But even he made efforts, sending cards on holidays, calling on my birthday. Small gestures that I appreciated even as I kept my guard up. Neither of them would ever be fully trusted again. That was the consequence of their choices. But they were still my sons. That bond, however strained, was not something I could completely sever. I am 63 years old now. Harold has been gone for almost 2 years, and sitting here looking back on everything that happened, I find myself at peace. Not because the pain has disappeared. There are still nights when I wake up reaching for Harold's side of the bed, still moments when I forget he is gone and start to call his name. Grief does not vanish. It transforms. It becomes part of you, woven into the fabric of who you are. But peace came when I accepted what happened and chose to move forward rather than drown in bitterness. When Harold gave me that key on his deathbed, he was not just giving me access to documents. He was giving me power, the power to protect myself, the power to stand up for my worth, the power to choose my own path regardless of what others expected. I learned that children are not always grateful, that love does not guarantee loyalty, that the people you sacrifice everything for might still walk away when there is nothing left to take. These are hard lessons, painful ones, but they are also freeing. I do not hate my sons. I feel sorry for them in a way. They allowed greed and the wrong partners to corrupt their values. They almost lost their mother forever. They did lose their father's respect, as Harold made clear in that letter. Those are wounds they will carry for the rest of their lives. Tiffany and Meredith showed their true colors when the money disappeared. One ran away, the other stayed, but only to torture Brandon with her disappointment. They were never family. They were predators circling an inheritance they felt entitled to claim. But I refused to let their betrayal define my remaining years. Harold protected me because he knew my worth even when our own children forgot it. He saw me, he valued me, and that knowledge is more precious than any amount of money. There is a lesson in my story for anyone willing to hear it. Do not take your family for granted. Do not let greed replace love. Do not listen to voices that tell you to put money above the people who raised you, supported you, sacrificed everything for you. And if you are the one being pushed aside, the one being told you do not matter, know this. You have worth. You have value. And you have the power to stand up for yourself even when the whole world seems to be against you. Harold taught me that. Not just in his will, but in the 40 years we spent building a life together. He taught me that strength comes in many forms. and that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most power. I think about that moment, often standing in that lawyer's office being told I was not an heir. I think about the choice I made to stay, to fight, to pull out that folder and change everything. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and the best thing, because in that moment I was not just claiming my inheritance, I was claiming my dignity, my self-respect, my right to be seen as an equal partner in everything Harold and I had built. To my sons, if you are listening to this, know that I still love you. I will always love you. But love does not mean I will let you walk all over me. Love does not mean I will accept being treated like nothing after giving everything. Your father taught me that too. And to everyone else watching, I leave you with this thought. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important message. Sometimes the person who seems the weakest turns out to be the strongest. And sometimes when life tries to push you aside, the best thing you can do is reach into your purse, pull out your truth, and show them exactly who you are. Harold knew that. He knew me. And that knowledge, that love, that protection will stay with me until we meet again. Thank you all for listening to my story today. I shared it not for sympathy, but in hope that it might help someone facing a similar situation. Family can break your heart, but it can also teach you just how strong you really are. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever been pushed aside by people you loved? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when everyone else was against you? Please share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss more stories like this one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share it with them. Sometimes a story can change a life. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And may you always have the courage to know your worth and the strength to defend it. Wishing you love, peace, and the wisdom to recognize who truly deserves a place in your life.